Hello YouTube, my name is Isabella and welcome back to my channel Stubbornly Bookish. Today I'm going to be discussing the 7 books I read in January. I'm so impressed with myself, not in the amount of books that I read, which is like a fine number, but I'm so impressed that I'm filming this on February 2nd. This has to be the earliest I've ever filmed a wrap-up in my life, and I would just like to acknowledge that. Like I said, I read 7 books this month. I would have liked the number to be higher, but to be honest, a lot of them were pretty big books, so I'm not mad at it. And yeah, let's just jump into it. So the first book I read in January, my first book of the new year, was Truth Witch by Susan Dennard. Truth Witch is the first book in the Witchland series, a series that I believe is meant to be 6 books total. It follows these 2 main characters, these best friends who get roped into this like huge political scheme and essentially are running for their lives in this first book. I loved this book. I thought the characters were incredibly well done. I was very impressed with the world building and the scope of the world. I liked the powers and the different things that the powers could do. They weren't just very simple. I thought this was incredibly fun and fast-paced. I was really impressed actually with the pacing because while there was a lot of fast moments, there also were a few moments of quiet and moments to breathe and like character moments, and I thought that was balanced incredibly well. I loved our 2 main characters. Their friendship is the cornerstone of this story, and I thought it was incredibly successful. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. If you want to hear all my thoughts, be sure to check out my review. This was a great way to start off my new year of reading. So the second book I decided to pick up, I'm very glad I finally did, and that was the Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. This is the sequel to The Final Empire, a book I've actually read twice. It's the sequel. Everyone knows what Mistborn is about. I'm not going to recap it. I liked this book, but I did not love it like I loved The Final Empire. I thought The Final Empire had a lot more going for it in terms of its characters, and that's where I think The Well of Ascension is at its weakest. The internal conflict between our 2 main characters within themselves was so inane and annoying to be reading over 700 pages. I was rolling my eyes at their conflict within themselves and their relationship, and it was just so frustrating because everything could have been solved if people decided to communicate. The plot and the world are still great. It was a bit slow going. It took a while for the plot to get like really good, but I love this world. I love the magic system. It's so very interesting. There are some very classic Sanderson twists that had me shocked. I was not expecting it whatsoever, and overall, this was good, but I think there was a bit too much filler in here, and it could have been like a way tighter, more epic story if we lost maybe 100 pages. I don't know if that's me being nitpicky. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Did really enjoy it. Because The Well of Ascension took me so long to get through, I decided I wanted a book that I could get through incredibly quickly, and nothing goes faster than adult contemporary romance. So I decided to pick up Along for the Ride by Mimi Grace. It's a really short kind of enemies to lovers road trip book. Essentially, these 2 characters who have not gotten along are forced into road tripping like across the country for our main character's sister, and things occur. Adult romance happens. It was almost a little too short. This book is barely over 200 pages, and because of that, a lot of things seemed rushed. I think this could have used another 50 more pages just to slowly develop more things. I liked our main character. I really appreciated her passion and drive for what she does, and I think the love interest was also pretty decently developed, especially for such a short story. I think my biggest issue was actually the writing of this book. There were some weird transitions, and it was a little stunted at times, and like I would go back being confused, not knowing what was going on, and it wasn't clear. It just wasn't actually aptly described sometimes in the story, which was a little bit bothersome, and everything was a wee bit too convenient for my tastes. I know obviously romance, it follows the tropes and all that kind of stuff, but the things that were pulling them apart and bringing them together was a little bit much. I give this overall 3 stars. I enjoyed it. It was fun, and this has some Own Voices representation here that I forgot to mention before. It was good. The next book I read was Obsidian by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. This is the finale to the Illuminae file series, and I was actually really excited to give this a shot. I didn't love Gemina, which I read a few months ago, but I wanted to give this a chance. I wanted to complete a series, and I was excited to see where this would go, because the other two books, some of the things in here have been batshit crazy, so I was excited to see what the finale would be. And frankly, this is the weakest book, in my opinion. We don't get a lot of time with new characters that are introduced, so you don't really feel invested in their part of the story. The stakes in here were incredibly high, but I was never concerned for the characters because of just the way that it was written. You never truly feared for their lives, which is something I require in like an epic scope of a finale. And there was a weird amount of borrowing from the previous books and like tropes or plot points that were somewhat recycled, which was so odd to me, but we were going through the same plot points that we had 2 books previously. So yeah, wasn't super impressed with this book. I'm glad I finished it. I was glad to see characters that we didn't get a lot of time with in Gemina and Illuminae, but overall, this wasn't a great finale. I gave it 3 stars. It was fine, but not going out with the bang that I wanted and expected it to. The next book I completed was A Closed and Common Orbit by Becky Chambers. This is the somewhat sequel to The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. It's a companion trilogy, so you don't have to have read the first book to read this, but I really enjoyed my time with this story. This is an incredibly quiet, slow-paced, character-driven sci-fi story, and I fucking loved that. I don't know if I'm going to say that's my favorite type of sci-fi, but it's something I really related to and was able to actually kind of picture in my head, and I just really enjoyed that. Really enjoyed the fact that this was so personal, and it was low stakes in the fact that there wasn't a lot of like, there was no battles or thing that you expect from sci-fi. It was all character-driven, all focused on themselves and their growth. And I enjoyed it a lot. Always love the exploration into AI. It's one of my favorite things to see in sci-fi. Super adored the emphasis on chosen families in here, and it was pretty great. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I completed, I had zero intention of reading recently, and I picked it up on a whim and had so much fun with it, and that's Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. I've never read this. It's a children's classic, follows the March sisters, and I knew very little going into it other than like one spoiler. I decided to pick this up on audio because I saw it pop up on Hoopla, and I've really wanted to watch the movie that has recently come out, so I said, you know what, screw it, let's read it. And it was so quaint, so heartwarming and lovely, and not what I was expecting at all, which is weird because it's a children's classic. Obviously this is supposed to be like a sweet family-driven story, but I think I was so impressed the fact that this book seemed to remain so modern. Obviously there are some like antiquated notions in here because this book takes place in like the 1830s, but I was so impressed by the lessons of the March mom and 4 sisters loved each other, and it just was so wonderful. It's a bit long, especially for a children's story. There was certain parts that dragged out a bit, and I would have liked a bit of editing, I guess. I wish that the story didn't kind of forget about each sister as the story went on. If you've read it, I think you know what I mean. Just like once they reach like the peak part of their story, they're kind of forgotten about. And I would have liked them to have a little bit more involvement in the final bit of the story, but I loved Jo. She's a fantastic main character. I think she would be a wonderful role model for young women to read. Yeah, I really enjoyed myself. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I was so impressed by all the books that I read and the ratings. My lowest thing was like a 3-star. I gave a lot of high ratings this month, and the last book unfortunately kind of not ruined it, but put a blip in that plan, and that was A Sorcery Ithorian. This is a standalone young adult high fantasy or fantasy story. It follows our main character Elizabeth, who is a child of the library. She grew up in a library, and her job is to protect magical books, and she also is raised in the society where sorcerers are evil and to be feared, but she ends up being accused of something she didn't do, so she has to team up with a sorcerer to right those wrongs. This story wasn't bad by any means. It just wasn't one that I particularly cared for. I liked the fact that this was a standalone, that there was one central issue that they had to solve. However, the characters in here are what needed to be strong for other elements to be weak, and the characters in here were very flat and underdeveloped. Our main character, you really don't get to know. This is a 450-page book, and you know barely anything about her backstory, barely anything that is motivating her currently, and she's just kind of dumb at times. Then it just got frustrating. It took her too long to realize some things and like get on board with what was happening. It just was a bit too much. And our love interest, Nathaniel, who is bisexual, which I really appreciated, but he also was underdeveloped. He just kind of goes into the story and then he's like, nope, and you don't see him for 50 pages. And then yet these two characters are having such intense feelings for one another, and I'm like, how? You've literally not been in his presence. How? I did enjoy some of the banter between them. We also have like a demon / cat guy that I really loved. He was the standout for this story. But overall, I just felt incredibly indifferent. The villain in here was ridiculous, mustache twirling to the mustache twirling nth degree. His motivations were insane. So I ended up giving this 2.5 out of 5 stars. It wasn't a bad story, just wasn't the book for me. It was fine. I'm a little disappointed because I thought I was really going to enjoy it. So that's it for all the books that I read in January. I actually really enjoyed a large majority of them, which is refreshing and nice. And I'm really excited for the rest of the year of reading. Let me know down in the comments below any of your thoughts about any of these books, or maybe your reading plans for February. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye!